Each month we explore a different topic balancing modern sensibilities with traditional sensitivity to give you new approaches to timeless Jewish ideas. I'm your host, David Beshefkin, and this month we're exploring Teshuva. Thank you so much to our series sponsors, Daniel and Mira Stokar, for their generous sponsorship of this month's entire topic. This podcast is part of a larger exploration of those big, juicy Jewish ideas. So be sure to check out 1840.org, where you can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. One of the best parts of hosting a podcast, and it's far outweighed by the awful parts of hosting a podcast, and there are many, my friends, but one of the best parts are the people who you get introduced to, the people who you meet, the friendships that you form. And those who've been listening for a while may remember that we had an interview with Jeff Bloom during our Rationality series. Jeff is somebody who's constantly emailing me, sending me articles, and we finally met for the first time, kind of fortuitously, and we recorded an interview, and it was really, really wonderful, and he remains really a friend. He's unbelievable. And Jeff, since I've known him, has kept on telling me, you have to meet this rabbi. Now, there's no worse way to introduce somebody to somebody new. You have to meet this rabbi. For most people, myself included, that's a trigger. I'm very rarely being like, you know what I need more of in my life? I need more rabbis. There are few people who walk around with that mentality on a day-to-day basis. I certainly am not one of them. The way to introduce a new relationship is you gotta meet this rabbi. I'm usually sure, send an email, Zyga benched, and I will never reply to it because it's not really the area in my life where I feel if only I knew more rabbis. But Jeff kept on telling me, you really should meet this person. And that person was Rabbi Shais Taub. And I brushed him off a bunch of times. He made an email introduction, and I ignored it. And finally, months later, I started listening to some of his ideas, to some of his Torah, and I actually had another interview where at the very end of the interview, I asked them, what is the book that really inspires you and keeps you moving? Right away, they said it's Rabbi Shais Taub's A God of Our Understanding, which is about addiction. And I reached out to him and I said, I want to have you on. I want to connect. Let's have a conversation. And it was so unusual. He said, I'll talk about anything, but I don't want to talk about addiction right now, which we actually talk about why not in this very conversation. And we made up to meet in my house in person where we recorded this. And we were supposed to meet at 6 o'clock. And, life gets busy. We both get busy. He finally came over at 8:45 p.m. to my house, and we were together way past midnight. We had a very long conversation about Teshuva. In fact, for the first time ever, we recorded a second episode that we're not releasing now, obviously, that deals more with addiction in particular, that hopefully we will release when we cover that subject. But it was one of the most fascinating evenings I've ever spent with somebody, which is somebody who's deeply immersed in the Chabad school of thought, but is so eclectic and so honest and so real, meaning sometimes when you immerse yourself in one specific school of thought, this could happen. This is not a criticism. I've seen it happen in all sorts of areas. You spend your whole life in one area of academic thought. You spend your whole life in one area of Torah thought. You spend your whole life in one professional area. It kind of can make you a more narrow person. But the exact opposite is true with Rabbi Shais Taub. There is a breadth. There is a depth. And there's an honesty that I found so absolutely refreshing. Now, I need to warn you, this conversation began at probably, past 9 o'clock. And it is sprawling, it was long, but it was deeply, deeply informative. And his approach and his honesty and kind of our enduring friendship right now. We're not texting every single day, but there is a commonality that I really found in the way that he approaches Jewish ideas, the way that he approaches life itself. That I really found a kinship, a friendship, something that resonated with me quite deeply. So it is without further ado that I introduce our conversation with Rabbi Shais Taub. I am so excited to have a guest who I am meeting for the very first time, but we've been introduced many a time by a former guest who I think we could say, our friend Jeff Bloom, who we had on a while ago. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to introduce, I'm just going to say Rabbi Taub, because I think that that's better, because I don't know how to pronounce your first name.
Okay, so should I help you with it?
Yeah, please.
Okay, Shais.
I would not have pronounced that correctly.
Yes.
That's a Yiddish name?
It's actually from a book called Genesis.
Your name, Shin.
Shin Sof.
Shin Sof.
Yeah, with a tere under the shin.
You don't hear that a lot.
No, you don't hear that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, that's absolutely lovely. We're not going to talk right now about naming antediluvian names pre-Noach, but we can do that a different time. That's a very exciting conversation that absolutely none of our listeners are interested in.
By the way, you know what Jeff's name is? Chanoich, also antediluvian.
Another antediluvian name.
Yeah.
Our listeners are going to be so disappointed right now that the first 5 or 10 minutes we're just talking about antediluvian names.
Yeah.
One of my all-time favorite words, of course, meaning preceding the flood. I reached out to you because you wrote a book. I want to talk about our conversation that we had before this conversation. You wrote a book called God of Our Understanding, which has been recommended more than once on this podcast, and it's about taking the 12 steps of recovery and addiction and kind of merging them, integrating it with Jewish thought, Jewish life. And I reached out to you, I said, I want to have you on to talk about what Teshuva is all about, and we'll couch it in your books. Last year we did an episode with a very dear friend of mine, Miriam Gisser, speaking about Alcoholics Anonymous and her journey with her family. And the moment I brought this up to you, you said, let's talk about anything but.
Anything but.
Anything but. Why do you not want to talk about addiction today?
There's many reasons, but I'll give you one. It's a very complicated sugya. It's not what anybody thinks it is going into it. And at the end, people land up being disappointed.
What do you mean disappointed? Tell me.
Well, it's a bait and switch. That's why I don't lecture on it, by the way. And anything but. When people bring me to lecture, they'll ask me something. Do an addiction topic. I say, you're bringing people, right? There's a crowd, right? You want them to be happy, right? Right. Okay, so trust me. They're not going to get what they think they're getting. And it's the worst thing you can do is bait and switch.
And also, you had mentioned to me that you don't want to feel like boxed in as like the addiction rabbi. You're sitting on a gold mine, meaning you could be.
Yeah, I mean, suppose it depends on your scruples. You could capitalize on that. I try to
avoid that.
I've avoided that. Yeah.
No, I related to it a lot because I have felt like that boxing in, and you become the rabbi who knows karate, who surfs, who does addiction.
Oh, you're the surfing rabbi?
No, I'm not the surfing rabbi.
Okay.
I wish I was.
That would be a lot cooler.
No, it would be much cooler. But like you get like put into something. I was so fascinated that you actually didn't want to get put into this very in vogue, important topic. What
is it in vogue?
Addiction is super in vogue because everything has become like globalized. The specificity of everything has been washed away. So depression, addiction, mindfulness, everything's just part of one glob of mental health.
Everybody has everything.
Everybody has everything.
What do you get for the man who has everything? Penicillin.
Very good. So, what do you want to be known for?
Oh my goodness, what do I want to be known for?
Somebody closes their eyes and thinks Rabbi Shais Taub. What do you want to come to mind?
Oh, this is like a cheshbon and nefesh, like a real spiritual stock taking over here.
This is what we do on 1840. We really get into it.
What do I want to be known for? What do I want people to think of when they think of me?
I think about this question a lot because I wrote a column for many years for Mishpacha magazine, and I loved it. I'm so proud of it. It's the hardest thing I ever did because it was a humor column, and we do these top fives every week. And at a certain point, I got tired of being, again, there were a few reasons why I ended it, none of which are that I got fired. I just want to be absolutely clear.
By the way, I also tell people the column, there's another magazine.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
The other
one. I did an advice column, which I also don't want to be known for. No joke. For 8 years for Ami. And in the end, I stopped writing. I never liked talking about it because it's like, I did that, moved on. But then when people are like, oh, I think the funniest 30 seconds on YouTube, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry King.
That's the clip that I shared.
That's the clip. They fired you or you fired them.
Are you not aware of this, that I was number one?
Right. And Jerry is so...
I shared that after people were like, did you get fired from Mishpacha?
Oh, you did?
I shared that exact clip.
I love that clip. It's like, you don't know who I am.
Give me a resume in here? Of course.
Yeah.
So for me, like, I felt boxed in. I felt like I'm being put into something.
The joke rabbi.
Yeah. So for you, I'm curious. What do you want to be known for?
Wow. I guess it's important to be known as a nice person, but I don't think that's the ultimate thing. I think it's more like a hechsher mitzvah. It's like being a nice guy makes it possible to do the real thing that I think I really value. Probably I just would like to be known as somebody who helps people to gain clarity, or somebody who uses ideas of Torah, or maybe more specifically, Panemius HaTorah.
Panemius meaning the
inner dimension, but no, let's say it. Let's say this.
Okay.
Let's just
Let's
say it right out.
Just
Let's say it. Teres Baal Shem
We don't
Tov.
have to beat around the bush here.
Yeah, okay. To help people to gain clarity about life. If I overheard somebody saying.
Yeah, that's kind of the question. Like, you overheard somebody describing you. What would you want to hear?
Would make my day if I walked in the room and I overheard some guy saying to another guy. Yeah, I watched a class of Shais Taub, and he said something a certain way. It's an idea that I've thought of before, but he said it in a way it made it click. And at that moment, I understood. I had complete clarity about this concept from the most abstruse level to the most practical application. I would be like, yeah.
Do you pay attention to how you're perceived? Do you ever Google yourself?
No.
Never?
No.
Do you really mean that?
Yeah.
Wow.
I can't take it.
You can't take it?
No. You see how much it bothers me when people say, oh, you're the column guy. Oh, you're the guy that understand the guy.
Correct.
So, no, I can't even go down that road.
I mean, there's nothing that I feel more diminished than when people refer to me as the Twitter guy. And there are people who do that.
Twitter
like,
guy?
oh, it's Twitter guy. Like, I have a big Twitter presence. Oh, it's the Twitter guy. And it's diminishing on the hierarchy of identity and how I want my contribution. That's not there. But what we are here to talk about is this kind of like clarity, particularly as it relates to Teshuva. And I guess I wanted to begin with a saying that I heard. I've never seen in print. I think it does exist, and maybe our listeners can dig it up. But there are 3 different works of Hasidus that are compared to 3 categories of people. And this is how I heard it phrased, that the Noam Elimelech, which is the work of Rav Elimelech of Lezhinsk, is for tzaddikim. The Sefer of the Tanya, which is literally, its name is for the Beinonim. A Beinonim, somebody who's like in between. I'm probably not phrasing it correctly. You're going to correct me in a moment. And Rabbi Nachman's of Breslov's Likutei Maharan is for Risha'im, for people who are really evil. My addendum to this is that the works of Ishbitz and Reb Tzadok is for people who they're all 3 categories at any given moment. Depends what day of the week it is, and that's probably where I fit in. But I wanted to talk about Teshuva and your own perspective, your own work in Teshuva. I don't like talking about Teshuva with rabbis, and I just want to say this right off the top, because I feel like they relapse into sermonic territory, into sheer territory, and it can be more difficult to really show it. Show me, don't tell me. And that's why I was nervous that you didn't want to talk about addiction, because I had 1,000,001 questions about that. I didn't want it to just be like,
give me your best tshuva sermon.
Yeah, give me your best. Give me your best idea.
Right. There's a word. They say a baldarshan speaker can't become Yerei Shamayim. He can't be God-fearing. Why? Because whenever he hears a message that would actually stir him,
resonate.
He says, "Oh, I got to remember that one for my next speech."
That's my life for sure. And you don't have anything that's for you. That's in that private. And I think the whole world's been reshaped and turned inside out that way. That having something for you. But I wanted to start with this notion of being a Beinoni, somebody who is in between.
That's my favorite subject, by the way.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Sefer of Beinonim, Tanya. I get 100 texts a day, maybe more. I don't know how often it happens. Maybe once a month, I get a Tanya text. If I see the word Tanya in a text, bam! Now I'm giving away. Now everyone's going to do that. They're going to write.
You're getting a lot of Tanya.
They're going to use that in the first.
I do not get that many Tanya texts. It's so interesting.
You don't get Tanya texts?
No, not as many as you would think.
Yeah.
I get a lot of like, what movie do I know this actor from? I get a lot of those. Constantly, hundreds a day. Where is it? He's from Fargo. Like those kind of questions. Right. A little less scholarly, but I do get a lot of texts a day. But I was always fascinated that this work Tanya by the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, he has this seminal work of Hasidic thought, colloquially called Tanya, because that's like the opening words.
Very good. It's colloquially called
Tanya.
It's not called Tanya.
Correct.
Alter Rebbe didn't call it Tanya.
But he called it instead Sefer Shel Beinonim.
That is correct.
And it's a hard word to translate. It's a Talmudic phrase that derives from a passage in Rosh Hashanah about the 3 different categories of people and their process of Teshuva, which must be at the heart of this work if he's taking it from this passage. But he chooses the name Sefer Shel Beinonim, the book for people in the middle, stuck in the middle, figuring out their way through the middle. And in many ways, I feel like we are in a generation of Beinonim. We are in a generation where, I don't know, I haven't met that many true tzaddikim. Maybe I'm from a distance, but true tzaddikim, it's hard to have heroes nowadays. It's hard to have heroes. And I haven't met that many Risha'im, that many evil people, because it's also hard to be evil nowadays. Because anytime somebody does something bad, you think about his upbringing, think about what they went through. How many evil people do you meet alive today in the street? I'm not interacting. Evil things happen, but I'm not me. I'm not hanging out with them.
I told somebody recently, I said, I don't know how many decades, if not centuries, it's been since there was the Metzias, the existence of a completely emotionally healthy Russia.
Exactly.
Nothing. In other words, there's someone who's evil. He doesn't have any trauma. He has no problems. He has a great relationship with his wife. Everything normal upbringing, and he's just wicked for its own sake. I don't know how many decades it's been since such a guy walked the earth.
It's been a minute. So I guess the question that I want to begin with is, why do you think the work is called Sefer of Beinonim? Explain to me within the framework of Chabad of why exactly it was given this name.
If I would have known that this podcast is going to focus on Tanya, I would have been a lot more excited about coming here.
You were very kind. You were very kind about being here, and I think that
I was excited, but I would have been even more excited. Well, when you say in between is a relative term. In between what? In the middle of what?
I always assumed that in the middle of tzaddik and Russia. It's in between,
That's
righteous
the common misconception.
and evil. He's in between these two poles. It's like a sandwich. You have one piece of bread that's holy and righteous. You have another piece of bread that's very evil. And where do you put the flesh? Where do you put the meat or the cream cheese? Not together, but whatever kind of sandwich you're making. In the middle is the Beinonim. He's in the middle of the bell curve.
Right. Middle of the bell curve. Right. Mediocrity.
Exactly.
You're the joke rabbi, right?
Don't start with me.
Don't start with it. George Carlin said, think about how dumb the average person is. Half the people are dumber than him. That's my bell curve joke.
We love a good bell curve joke. But explain to me.
Yeah. So a Beinonim is not a guy in the middle of the bell curve. Not a C student in the moral sense. The dichotomy that the Alter Rebbe sets up in Tanya, functionally, I think it's easier to describe it as insides and outsides. Maybe I'll start with outsides first because it's so much easier to describe. Behaviors. Your behaviors are your outsides, meaning what people see. Insides means your inner world, your feelings, your worldviews that those feelings come from. He describes over the mechanics of emotions derived from intellect. Those are the two worlds, the inner world and the outer world. Let's call it the cognitive emotional on one hand and the behavioral on the other. So the tzaddik is the one who has perfect alignment, where he actually requires no impulse control. I tell people when I'm teaching Tanya, I always say, you want to find out if you're a tzaddik, have a home test that you can do. For 24 hours, any impulse that arises to your mind, do not filter it, don't question it, immediately act on it. And if for 24 hours nothing comes out but
nobody
mitzvahs,
gets hurt,
right, then you're a tzaddik.
Yeah.
So tzaddik has perfect alignment. He has perfectly holy, pristine insides and outsides. He only does good because he only wants good. Then on the other extreme, you have the Rasha. Who's the Rasha? The Rasha is the person who doesn't have perfect behaviors. And the reason he doesn't have perfect behaviors is because he doesn't have perfect insides. He's conflicted inside. He explains there's another major concept of the Shtei Nefashos. There are two souls, which actually doesn't originate from Tanya. It's from Rav Chaim Vital. It's Lurianic Kabbalah. The idea of the two souls, Nefesh Bamas, Nefesh Alakis, which is a similar concept to the Talmudic idea of Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, the evil inclination. But here we call it the godly soul and the animal soul, or in plain English for 2022, I say the impulse for self-transcendence and the impulse for self-preservation.
I like that.
I think it's more accessible. There's this inner conflict between the drive or the penchant for self-transcendence and the drive or the impulse for self-preservation, which isn't inherently immoral, it's amoral, which is why it's called animalistic. And it can justify immorality if that's what I need to do, right? Because it's self-preservation. And that conflict between those two souls, that's sort of the imperfect emotional world of this Rasha. And because he doesn't have perfect impulse control, his behaviors belie that. He's conflicted on the inside, and you get a hodgepodge of behaviors on the outside. Sometimes he does a mitzvah, and the next minute...
You're describing the person in the middle.
No, that's the Rasha.
This is the Rasha.
That's the
You're
Rasha.
still doing the Rasha. Okay.
Yeah, that's the Rasha.
So I'm so curious who the middle is then.
Okay. You would think, and the Alter Rebbe actually addresses this right in chapter 1. He says, you would think that the Beinonim is the guy who's half and half. He does half mitzvahs.
I thought you were describing
So
him.
he says that...
Or her.
In the context of schar v'einish.
Reward and punishment.
Right. we do use the term tzaddik Rosh Beini you used the word colloquial earlier.
Yeah.
He calls it a shem hamushal, a borrowed term.
Okay.
In the context of reward and punishment, sometimes we use tzaddik Rosh Beini in the terms of somebody who has more merits than demerits.
Okay.
Right? And that's called a tzaddik. But that doesn't really mean a tzaddik. That's like we say somebody was acquitted in a court of law. He's innocent. He's not innocent. He just...
Correct.
Right. But the real tzaddik Rosh Beini is describing, like I said, the tzaddik is the person with perfect insides and perfect outsides. The Rosh is the guy with conflicted insides and therefore a mixture of outsides. He does mitzvahs, he does avedas. What proportion? It's a very broad spectrum. I mean,
Sure.
There are Rishoyim who do 99.9% mitzvahs. They're good guys, but
they're conflicted.
They're conflicted. How conflicted?
They're misaligned.
Right, like Churchill said, now we're haggling on a price.
Yeah.
Okay, how conflicted? I don't know. Conflicted, meaning not consistent, not 100%.
Yeah.
How often does the pilot crash the plane? I don't know, even once. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Now who's the Beinoni? The Beinoni is in between those two in as much as he has the insides of a Rosha with the outsides of a tzaddik. If you would watch him, you would swear he's a tzaddik. Because what you can see, I mean, his behaviors, objectively, he looks 100% holy. And not because he knows how to do his Avedas in private. No, even if you ask his CIA agent who's spying on him, or what's the...
NSA?
NSA, yeah. They're the ones who's spying on us?
You better believe it. But what do you think this mic is plugged into?
So, if you ask the NSA, is this guy, always doing the right thing? Always does the right thing, right? But there's a lot of conflict inside. He doesn't automatically do it. He doesn't always want to do the right thing. He has to overcome an internal struggle. That's the Beinoni.
Why do you think there's so many, I've written books, you've written books. I fell in love with your book, and I know that's not what we're talking about, but I fell in love with the title, right? A God of Your Understanding.
Right.
It articulates so clearly what I think people are searching for. I want a God of my understanding, not the God that my Rebbe gave me in 3rd grade, not the God that my parents forced me to do in 10th grade, not the God that felt totally absent in college. It works.
Right.
But I'm curious, why do you think this seminal work at the center of Chabad is called after a demographic? And a demographic that's related in the context of Teshuva. I don't want to have suggestions to the Alter Rebbe. Why not call it Chabad, or why not call it Introduction to Chabad?
Well, that's a great question, because the Tanya is not an introduction to Chabad. It's not at all. If you want an introduction to Chabad Chassidus, I would recommend the Alter Rebbe has other discourses that are in Torah Or and Likutei Torah.
And the Rebbe has a literal introduction.
Well, you're talking about Kuntras and Yonish Shel Torah Chassidus?
Yeah.
There are many works that I would start someone
But
with.
it's not an introduction
It's not
to
a primer on Chabad Chassidus, not at all.
But why give it that name? What's at the heart of what he's trying to...
He says very clearly in the intro what the point of the book is. It serves a very specific purpose.
And what is that?
Very simple. He says that people would come to him for personal audiences, and they would ask guidance. I mean, some people would come and they ask for blessings, but there are people who came to him as a spiritual mentor. They would ask for guidance, how to do what they got to do. Like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know what my service of Hashem is supposed to look like, and I'm not hitting the mark. And they would come to him and ask for guidance. So he said it's not possible any longer to give that kind of FaceTime to everybody. So I'm going to write a book, and the book will simulate that mentor experience. So the book has a very specific purpose. It's not an encyclopedia of Chabad thought. It's not an introduction to Chabad thought. It is a manual for personal development, specifically aimed at a demographic, because what's every publisher going to ask you? Who's your audience? If you had to write a book proposal for Tanya,
Correct.
Who's your audience?
And his audience were people who could no longer be there on an individual level.
And more specifically, as you were saying, the conflicted people. I'm writing to a guy who's conflicted and wants to figure out how to manage that conflict. And he's never going to resolve the conflict. He's going to manage it. He'll never resolve it. He'll never get, like the tzaddik, perfect insides and perfect outsides. He's never going to come to the level where he'll never be tempted again, where he'll never have the impulse to do something sinful. He will have that impulse. And here's the method that I have for him to be as productive as he can be.
So here's my question, and this is getting a great deal more practical, though not yet personal. Somebody comes to you, and their life is in disarray, their religious life, their emotional life. And you said people reach out to you a lot. You want to be known as a helper. And a lot of times, particularly during, as we approach the high holidays, the Yomim Noraim, there are people, they're looking for like a step-by-step guide. Where do I start? And everything gets suffused like we began with depression, addiction. It just gets suffused in this big slop. Teshuva is another thing. Like,
Right.
I'm going to do tshuva. I want to do something. So
Right.
if you're from certain communities, you're more careful about kosher. If you're in other communities, you're more careful about your lashon hara, about your negative speech. If you're in other communities, you're going to start learning a bit more and more intensely. Where do you think the teshuva process should start? Somebody comes to you, they say, my life's a mess. Where are you conflicted? I'm conflicted everywhere. Everywhere I'm conflicted. You don't think I've ever... Shabbos, I've had desires to not keep Shabbos. I've desired for sexual immorality. Everything's a mess. I'm not learning enough. Where do I start? And the problem is that I feel like people have, and this is like me, like it's easy to become cynical about the teshuva process itself. I've seen this movie before. I know this movie.
Right.
I know the inspiration, the call for, Uru Yeshenim, wake up, now's the time.
Right.
And I know what happens. Maybe when your younger years, you lasted, I used to like wait after, Ma'ariv, that final prayer of Yom Kippur, and try to notice the first Aveira I did. What was the first one that like dirties in your mind, that clean slate? And now, like these days, like I don't know, I feel like by the time I come home after shul, like it's already messy. It's already messy. You fall back into this vat of experience. The moment of purity, which I do still feel, it flashes by in a second. So where do you tell people to start in this process?
Yeah. First, I would ask him, like, other than the fact that you heard that tshuva is a thing, why do you specifically feel that you need to do it?
It's what everybody's talking about. It's the rage. Everybody's talking about it. I go into shul, the rabbi tells me to do tshuva, and I'm seeing it, on the posters, on the conferences, and all the places, and like, I want to take a shot at it.
Yeah, hashtag tshuva.
Hashtag tshuva. On social media, they're sharing 1-minute videos.
I would start with a guy like that. I'd be like, can we even define what this thing is?
Okay.
Like, maybe you won't even want it after you find out what it is.
And how would you define it for this person?
So, it's interesting. In the Zohar is the main Kabbalistic text. It says the word teshuva is a phrase, toshav hay, return the hay. Hay's a letter.
In the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah, in the Hebrew alphabet. Like, what hay? You want to use a really nice Sensino type word, since you said antediluvian before.
And colloquially?
I
have a running list of all the fancy words I've used.
So, the tetragrammaton.
Oh, that's very fancy. Yeah. Okay.
Or ineffable name.
The ineffable. Okay.
So, the 4-letter name of Hashem, which is spelled with a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey. So, you notice that hey is twice there. And we won't get into a whole lengthy discussion because you told me not to be didactic. You didn't use that word.
Pedantic.
Okay, didactic's okay.
I literally told you not to be
pedantic.
Yes.
Is over the line.
Yes.
Okay, that's where we draw the line.
Correct.
So there's a higher hay and a lower hay because you have to imagine the name vertically
correct
integrated. It's actually a map of the worlds. But anyways, there's a higher hay and a lower hay. Now, that image, which is essentially an image of God, is repeated in the human being. We're in the image of God. So the person also is sort of made of a yud ke vav ke. That's how we pronounce it. We don't say the hey, because if you say all the letters consecutively like that, just like we avoid saying the name of God, so we avoid even saying the letters that make up the name of God. So in the person, yud is chokhmah. How would you translate that? That's faith, transcendence, precognitive functioning. Then the hay, the higher hay, is bina. Bina is cognition, elaborative thought, associations, creativity, but it's intellectual. Then the vav is emotional. And there's a lot of explanation I'm just skipping because it's not the point. And then the lower hay is malchus, which is action, behavior. So toshav hay. Hey ilah, tshuva ilah. Hey tata, tshuva tata. It's an Aramaic phrase from the Zohar, which basically means teshuva, return, literally, means return the hay. Which hay? Well, depends. Return the higher hay, you're doing the higher tshuva. Return the lower hay, you're doing the lower tshuva.
There are 2 kinds of tshuva.
2 levels. So, what the higher hay, we said, was cognition. The lower hay, we said, was behavior. Those are 2 levels of teshuva. Return means realign. Get back in alignment with God. So 2 levels. Do you want to align your behaviors with God's will? That's one level. Or do you want to align your thinking with God's will? That's a much higher level.
It's interesting because when I think about like aligning my thinking with God, sometimes it's almost easier. The consistency of action is where I struggle.
But if our thinking were truly aligned with God, then the behaviors flow automatically. Because I'm not talking about thinking in the conceptual sense. I'm talking about in terms of a worldview. Meaning if your cognitive filter for processing everything were completely holy, you could only come to holy behavior. That would be the only conclusion that you could come to. So essentially the question is, do you want to change what you're doing or do you want to change your worldview?
You can push me back, but I'm going to call you out and then I'm going to ask you a question. A, I don't want to veer too much into the world of shiurim, and I'm worried that to unpack this,
It's going to be called a whole long shear.
no, I need.
And we don't want that.
Exactly. To unpack this, I need to get personal. So I want to ask the following question: what was the time in your life where you, Rabbi Shais Taub, did Teshuva? What does that recall in your mind? What does that process look like for you? I'm curious. I don't know how you were raised. We know very little about each other.
Yeah,
that
but
we
that's
share
not
a lot
tshuva. That is a misnomer.
What's not tshuva?
Term that we colloquially, that's our favorite word of the day, refer to as a Baal tshuva, is not tshuva at all. So like I was raised in a family where my parents got close to Chabad and then we became closer to Chabad and then we started taking on more things. I don't call that tshuva. Something that I didn't do because that wasn't the standard that we kept yet and then we kept a higher standard. That's not tshuva.
What is that?
I don't know. That's just finding something out. It's not tshuva.
Your parents were colloquially what would be described as Bali Teshuva.
Yeah.
And where did you grow
Chicago.
up?
My parents are in Rogers Park, yeah.
I still hear it in your voice now.
Because I say Chicago properly.
Yeah, properly, like a
Yeah.
mensch. But I like that. It's finding something out. You don't have to live with this like stamp with this. I am a Baal Tshuva. You found something out. You adopted. Fine.
That's not tshuva.
So what is? And what is it for you? I don't
Tshuva
want another
is
shear. I don't want if you start without mentioning the tetragrammaton.
Tshuva is when you had something already and you lost it and you had to get it back again. Tshuva is not a guy who grew up with one standard of Yiddishkeit and then he did the system update and he got the new,
Flipped out. He got really stark in Israel.
Or it doesn't matter how radical the leap
yeshiva,
is. The point is whether he got a lot more or a little more. That's just doing more than what you did before. Tshuva is when you had it, you lost it, and you had to get it back again.
I actually find that deeply moving. I'm curious why you're saying that, number one, and I'm curious what that means for you, particularly. Why is that the expression of tshuva in your mind? When you lose something? Because there were so many things in my life that I lost and I had to get it back in my religious life.
You have to fight for it.
I lost Shabbos for a period of my life. I lost Sukkot for a period of my life. I lost Yiddish. I hang on for dear life. And there's a point where things slipped out, real things. When I say I lost Sukkot, it's like a strange thing, but that's the first thing that came to mind. Where you lost something, I lost Sukkot. I could not observe Sukkot for years in my 20s because I felt my whole life was temporary. I felt like my whole life was ephemeral.
So when they say, the Sukkah teaches that life is fleeting. No kidding, it's fleeting.
No kidding. You don't think
It's my whole day.
Yeah, my whole day. Every Shabbos I'm reminded of that. Every time I have to renew and find roommates, I remember that.
Right.
And I lost it. I didn't like it. I had a negative association with it. And when I first got married, I still didn't like it. And I had to find it. And for me, that entire Yontif, Sukkot is all about tshuva, for sure. It's the culmination of the whole process. But it's something I lost and had to rebuild.
Yeah.
Why do you say that's at the heart of tshuva? And what does that look like in your life?
See, I'll tell you, the most precious thing in the world is sensitivity. It is inherent to lack of experience. When you're innocent, you're sensitive. Somebody who never crossed a red line, it's scary. What'll it be? Will I get struck by lightning, right? And that sensitivity of innocence will hold you back from getting too close to the red line until it's one usage. That's it. You cross the red line and that's it. The sensitivity of innocence is gone forever and you'll never get it back. See, sensitivity of innocence is I dare not cross that line. I do not know. There be dragons, right? I don't know. I'll fall off the edge of the earth.
Sure.
Until you
do.
Right. That's pshat. I'm sorry that I'm going to be didactic. I hope not pedantic.
I'll give you a didactic break. Sure.
Okay. Over v'shona nasa lekeheter. A person does the aveda and then he does it twice. becomes as if it were permissible. What does it mean? What does that mean? I mean, it's a passage from the Talmud. What's it
Is
describe?
now a good time to tell you that I have an entire essay on that passage in my Sefer Berogas Rachi Tizkor? My awfully selling. It's not even, I call my book Synagogue.
I can't believe that.
Medium selling.
Tizkor to me should be like as big as like.
It should be a bestseller.
Yeah,
I
it
asked
should be in
myself,
every airport bookstore.
It's so strange to me that it's not.
Crazy.
And I go into airport bookstores sometimes and I ask them.
And you look for it. Berogas
I
Rachi
ask the person
Tizkor.
behind the desk, do you happen to have a Berogas Rachi?
And you know of the new Stephen King.
And they don't. Not a once.
That's
But
wild.
I happen to love this passage. The passage of Talmud is that if you violate a sin multiple times, it now...
No, it doesn't say multiple.
Correct.
For Shana. It only takes
Correct.
the second time. It only hurts
It
the
appears
first
now
time.
that it is permissible.
Subjectively. And that's the question the Gemara asks.
Like, it's not actually
It doesn't
permissible.
actually become permissible.
Correct.
No, I didn't say it becomes
Correct.
permissible. It'll feel permissible.
My piece in that essay, because I know you're dying to know,
Yeah.
is about
Because
that.
I went to the airport bookstore. They were out of stock.
Just missed it. Just missed the next shipment. My entire piece is about what is known Talmudically as the Havamina and Maskana in that Gemara. What changed that initially the Gemara says it is actually permissible, and then
What's even the
Then the
Havamina?
Talmud
Who
concludes.
thought there was an
Correct.
antinomian? Like,
That's my piece.
what is the Havamina?
Oh, I'm not. This is your time. This is your
Okay,
time.
okay, no
But
problem.
I'm sure all of our listeners are quickly Googling. It's free on Hebrew books. But that's that experience. And I know what it means to
And the
cross
Bali
a line.
Musar say if you'll do it 3 times, it'll feel like a mitzvah.
Do they say that? That's
Yeah,
great.
I think so, yeah.
That's great. So I know what that is. And I have no doubt that everybody in their life had a line that they never wanted to cross. And then they did. And the first time it felt transgressive in the most real, material way. Like you felt like you destroyed something.
Right.
And then the line, I always think of it in my mind, like you drew the line, literally drew it in the sand, but right next to the shoreline.
Right.
So then the tide comes in and like the line is still perceptible where you had it, but it's like a little muddled from the ocean.
Right.
Then a third and then a fourth. And like before you know it, you're like, where did I draw? Like I forgot where it was.
Right.
So initially you were saying there is a sensitivity of innocence that until we transgress something, so long as we hold it dear, we preserve it, we nurture it.
And it's very powerful.
Deeply powerful.
Yeah.
When you raise kids, especially, like you want to, you want them to have it forever.
That bubble forever.
And you know it's not going to. But
but as long as possible.
You want it to be
how
this magical.
Like what age people always? What age should I buy them a smartphone? As late as possible. If you can keep stalling, run out the clock.
You want to preserve that world. So then you lose it. Then you lose the sensitivity of innocence, and you can never get back.
You can never get it back. You can try, but there's no way to regain the innocence.
So now what?
Unless you erase the memory card. There's no such thing.
Because I think that's a misconception that people have even later, where I think we grow up with this imagery of like the Teshuva process being a blank slate. And I take issue with that because...
Then what would be the point? It's a zero-sum game.
Meaning?
Then why did you have to go through it? You believe in God? You believe that your journey was orchestrated? So that's what it was all for? Digging a hole and filling it back up again?
And it was also like, it was almost like gaslighting. Like, and Teshuva will give you a blank slate. And then like, I'm looking at my slate and I feel like I'm really trying to do something.
Right.
There were years, and every year I'm focused on different things. There were years where I really put in the work. And you're like, it doesn't get blank. Like, you could still see the chalk, like on the bad boards that you had in yeshiva or seminary, the bad marker boards. You know somebody used permanent marker on that whiteboard. And you know you could still see, well, it doesn't get blank. So you lose it and you can't get it back. Now what?
The thing is like this. The innocence is not inherently valuable. The innocence is valuable because it comes with sensitivity. The sensitivity is the real value. The sensitivity is what we want. Now, the sensitivity of innocence, you're never going to get back because you're not going to get back the innocence. But what you discover is that you can become sensitive again. You're not going to regain the sensitivity of innocence. That's gone. It's a different sensitivity. And it's actually a greater sensitivity.
Because what's the sensitivity? Where does it derive from?
It's the sensitivity of experience.
Meaning?
So you've lost the sensitivity of innocence, never to be regained.
Where it was just the great beyond. What happens if I violated Shabbos? What happens if I let go of this practice, of this observance?
The sensitivity of experience. See, the difference is sensitivity of innocence is I dare not cross the line because I know not what lies over there.
Yeah.
And the sensitivity of experience is I dare not cross the line because I know exactly what's over there. And I'm never going back.
I love that so much. I want to tell you what comes to mind for me, especially, in these dense towns that a lot of Orthodox Jews live in now. Teaneck, the 5 towns. So there's a very healthy, and I'm not knocking it, it's something very beautiful. Communal practice, particularly of halacha, is very beautiful. Like there's a pressure that people feel like you gotta up the standards and really toe the line and really do it. Otherwise, I'm not gonna get my kid in the right school. I'm not gonna be seen in the right way. And to me, and I don't know if it's a perfect analogy, but I want to contrast it to something. It's a little bit of the sensitivity of innocence that like, you gotta do as much as you can, because otherwise, who knows? Like, we'll just fall apart as a community. And I've always contrasted that with my father's relationship to halacha. My father is a stringent machmir in a way that is so, and I love him and I admire him, but my whole relationship to halacha is absolute reaction to his intensity. But he has an intensity, it looks the same as a young yeshiva student. It looks the same, but it's not, because it's the sensitivity of experience. Because he knows what happens and he knows what it looks like if you start slipping. Because he grew up in a town where it was almost all lost, where almost all Yiddishkeit was almost entirely lost.
So it's like you go to the subway, you see a guy waiting for the train, he's standing with his back to the wall, and you say to him, you could go all the way up to the yellow line.
Yeah.
And he says, I've seen guys get
correct.
Here. I'm not going up to the yellow line.
That's he's seen what happens if your grasp starts to loosen. So he holds on really tight. Dare I say it, at sometimes in childhood, it felt like too tight. You know what I mean? Like, Dad, like, relax. We're in Lawrence, New York. Don't worry. We're okay. He's holding on very tight. And that is a sensitivity of experience, because he's seen what happened. He's seen what happened in his own life, in his own family.
You know, Rabbi Yoelish, the Satmarov, the Divrei Yoel.
Didn't see him making an appearance in this conversation. I love it.
I love Satmar. I said it unironically. I love Satmar. We're going to talk about it another day.
Okay. Could you say in a sentence why?
Because I've just had excellent experiences, wonderful experiences with Satmar people who are just very earnest and eager to learn. And when I wrote that column, my biggest fans, I don't know if that's
Get
the term.
Out of here. We're
Satmar, 100%. People who would come to me and stop me in the street and say to me, like, oh, I want to tell you something that you said, and they would quote it back to me.
Huh.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. But why did I bring up Satmar?
Yeah,
because I was going to say to you, I don't know if this, I mean, a lot of people attribute a lot of, but Satmarov was once consulted about a business thing, and people would ask him for advice. And basically, were two guys. One guy who had money and one guy who had experience. So they made a partnership. One guy has money, one guy has experience. So they get together. They made a business partnership. So by the end of the partnership, the one who used to have the money got some experience, and the guy with the experience got the money.
Gotcha.
What is that? That's deep. Ein chacham kabal nesayin. School of Hard Knocks, baby. You want some experience? Costs. Experience costs money. It's a price of admission.
I want to come back to this idea because I really find it that profound. When the sensitivity of innocence is lost
and can never be regained,
can only be restored through the sensitivity of experience,
which is a higher level of sensitivity.
Broadly speaking, where do you couch this idea? And where do you find the larger idea that Teshuva by definition
go back to
is
Tanya.
Something that has to be lost and restored?
Go back to Tanya. You started with Tanya. Let's go back to Tanya.
Let's go back.
So, yeah. So he says over there, let's bring another passage from Talmud. Zdainis nasale kazachias.
Yeah.
Not just sins. Zdainis means wanton sins.
The deliberate.
Deliberate sins. Like I did it and I knew it was wrong. And I don't care.
Which says that the process of tshuva allows your deliberate sins to be transformed.
Right. So not that they're wiped
into
clean.
merit.
Like you said, oh, the slate was wiped clean. No. Nasale kazachis, they're there. They're now in the form of merits. So the Alter Rebbe explains those mechanics very, very clearly. He explains it actually psychologically with the metaphor of somebody who's in a parched desert and he thirsts for water. So he's had water before, but he never appreciates water like he did until he was in the desert. So the person who experiences the estrangement yearns for that which he had taken for granted.
I love that. Say that one more time. The person
who experiences estrangement, obviously from God, then yearns for that which he had taken for granted.
And that's what you're saying. Taken for granted.
Because I had it.
Yeah. The sensitivity of innocence.
Yeah. And that I didn't value it because of my innocence. I preserved it because of my innocence, but I also lost it easily because of my innocence.
And, the mistake that I find people make is that they lose the sensitivity of innocence and they want to restore it and they want back sensitivity of innocence again.
It'll never happen.
They want to go back to those times. That's the mistake.
That's the self-cruelty.
Why do you call that self-cruelty?
Because it's an impossible task.
It has to be restored through experience.
Only. And in fact, I'll go further to say, the only reason why God allowed you to experience that estrangement.
To transform it.
Only to transform it into an asset.
So I'm so curious, and I'm not trying to pry into your personal life.
You want to know my favorite Avedas?
It happens to be, that's a famous story. I was one time set up on a date. My dating history really spanned my own spiritual transformation. The early years of dating, I was in Ner Yisrael, I was wearing the black hat and the suit and really doing it for it. It was serious. And I went out with a girl who just got back from seminary, and she was fired up. She was all the way fired. And she was talking about her mitzvahs and the chesed and all the things you're doing. And I just stopped, and I was just like, I know about your favorite mitzvahs, but like what are your favorite averas? Like, who we like? It was the only. We didn't go out again.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, that was. And you know what? It was the right move. It was the right
on
move on her part. Yeah. I didn't falter for a second. I almost didn't even call the matchmaker, the shadchan. I just you know what? You don't even have to let me know about this one. But I'm curious for you, where's this process? I lost Sukkot. I think to a degree, the way I've centered Shabbos in my life, the experience of Shabbos, is because Shabbos is something that I dreaded. I had to do Teshuva because I lost these experiences. And there's this transformation that, again, this is your language, and I find it so evocative and so moving, of losing the sensitivity of innocence and figuring out and finding the sensitivity of experience. And that can take years. That's not a one Yom Kippur, in and out.
It usually doesn't happen on Yom Kippur.
Why do you say it doesn't usually happen on Yom Kippur?
I don't know, because if you were writing a movie, it would have to happen on Yom Kippur.
But in real life...
It happens on a random Wednesday afternoon in November or something,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, where that takes you. You spend so much time speaking, and you said yourself, speakers have the hardest time because they're always looking for, where does this notion, I love what you said, estrangement from what you once had and now yearning for it to be restored.
Yeah.
What does that mean in your life?
First of all, you talk about the speaker. There are speeches that I've given hundreds of times. Now, I never give it the same way every time because I don't have a script, and I rarely even have notes. Because, can I say something cynical?
Please.
Although I get paid to speak, I actually have to say things that I believe. I think Mark Twain said, if you never lie, you never have to remember anything. I only say things that I actually believe.
Okay.
Doesn't mean I'm living up to them, but I believe.
Okay.
So every time I speak, even if I've given that particular talk hundreds of times, I'm listening to myself. I'm listening. I'm in the audience listening and saying, I need to hear this. Apparently, I need to hear this because I don't believe that God made me stand up in front of these people right now and speak because I needed to collect an honorarium. I don't believe that's why I'm there. And I don't even believe I'm there only so that they should hear my message, because otherwise somebody else could have come and given that message.
So when you speak, and I'll be honest, I hope one day that my honorarium reaches the pinky toe of your honorariums. That's a bracha. You could answer amen to that.
Amen.
But I appreciate that. I also speak a little bit, and there are times that I speak that I think any time that I get emotional, it's not to work the crowd. It's because I'm sharing something very real, and it bubbles up. I'm curious for you, when you speak, what are the topics? Where does it take you? I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to get down even lower than the lowest hay and understand you as a person. Okay, you're a rabbi. You speak a lot about tshuva. You're not just the addiction rabbi. You're not just the advice column rabbi. So where are you in this? Somebody
sent to me a clip. There's a shlucha, meaning a Chabad emissary from Chernigov.
Okay.
A regular American girl. But this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe's mandate. You vote with your feet. You don't just preach Ahavas Yisrael. Don't just say I love every Jew. You go to the ends of the earth for a Jew. So, regular American girl on Shlichus, Chabad emissary in Chernigov. It's Ukraine, okay? The town got bombed out. She's a war refugee. She had to pack a suitcase, her and her kids, get on a train, get out of Ukraine. After she got to safety, she's a refugee still, a literal refugee. And she got interviewed on Chabad.org. And somebody sent this to me, or otherwise I don't think I would have seen it.
Okay.
They asked her, are you okay? And she's like, I'm okay. How are you okay? She's, well, because I get through this with the Emunah and B'tochen, with my faith in God and my trust in God. Then she says, this sounds very self-promotional to say this. She says, truth is, before this whole war broke out, I was going through a difficult pregnancy and I needed a lot of chizuk, I needed a lot of spiritual encouragement and inspiration. And she said, I got very into this talk by Shais Taub. And she did it actually so good. She said, on soulwords.org.
She plugged you.
She plugged perfectly.
You got the plug. Beautiful. No, if somebody plugged my book in an interview, somebody else unprompted, no, I would get choked up.
Yeah. So she says, there's a talk on soulwords.org called How to Be Here by Rabbi Shais Taub. And I watched that talk over and over again to get through this difficult period of my pregnancy. And by the time the war broke out, nothing could disturb me.
Okay.
So I'm like, holy cow. This woman is a refugee, her and her children. And she's saying, I'm okay, I'm good. Now, what's this talk, How to Be Here? It's a talk about how to show up for life, how to be present even when things are crazy. That's what faith in God is. It's not about some theoretical concept. It's about actually showing up for your life with some modicum of composure, even when stuff is crazy. So she was inspired by this talk, and I was like, wow, this person listened to something I said and used it to get through being a war refugee. I didn't do that. I don't think I ever could do that. But on my level, which is, what they call first world problems.
Yeah.
So on my level, first world problems. Like what?
I don't believe you. I do not believe you for 1 second
that
the only thing you have is first world problems. I just want you to...
It's never a war refugee.
You're never a war refugee, but I don't believe that for a moment. First world problems is like, you got your Starbucks order wrong. I think that there's something more real, given the subject matter that you write about, given how your words are able to resonate with people who are going through real things. I don't believe it for a second. Now, I'm not asking you to disclose what those most real issues are, but I am going to push you one more time. And I do want to know, when you think of tshuva practically in your own life, to kind of animate some of the way that these ideas...
So how did I come up with a talk? Why would I even give... I've given this talk 100 times.
Okay.
About using faith to not be a mess.
Yeah.
Obviously, why did I come up with such a talk? Because I thought it would be hot? That's like you. You wrote B'Reg Zrachim Tizka just to be a bestseller.
Big time.
But I did this because these are the tools that I use to manage life. So showing up for life and not being reactive takes an incredible... See, I'm not a spiritual person. People don't realize that. They think I'm a spiritual person because of what I talk about. I'm not a spiritual person. I am required by necessity to take spirituality very seriously.
Necessity of your job?
No, to function.
Was there ever a period where you would describe yourself as not showing up?
I have the temptation to not show up almost constantly.
Tell me, I want to phrase it more specific, and I'm not going to push you any further on this, but an example of something that you lost, that you became estranged from, and then had to rediscover in your own life.
Well, the most basics, just the essential belief, practical belief in God. I don't mean dogmatic belief, like if someone stops you on the street and gives you a theological quiz, would you have to lie in order to get the answers right? I don't mean that. I mean practical faith. Like, do you live your life in any way that is consistent with what you purport to believe? I mean emotionally. If you believe in what you say you believe, then why are you so afraid? Why are you so uncomfortable? Why are you so angry? Why are you so frustrated? So that's something that I had on a level of sensitivity of innocence, because it was taught to me. I was taught to believe in a certain God concept, which I'm grateful that the God concept that was taught to me, and this may sound chauvinistic, but the way that the God concept is explained in Chabad Chassidus, which is a branch of Teres Baal Shem Tov, which is very heavy on Hashgacha Pratis, everything's divine providence. And so that's what was taught to me, and that's what I believed because that's what was taught. And I accepted that, bitmimus.
And when did you lose it?
Well, there's different incidents of losing it or feeling myself sort of loosening my grip.
Okay. What was the time that grip loosened?
I'll tell you a story that is going to sound silly, but it's a moving story to me.
Okay.
I don't expect you to be moved by it.
Okay.
I'm okay with you being amused by it.
Okay.
But just so you know...
Moved or amused are two great options.
Either way, right. Well, what would be really devastating? You'll just hear it be like, yeah, okay. When I was a bacher in 770, I had a car, which was very uncommon. Most people didn't have cars. I had a car. It was actually a blue Dodge Caravan. And the way that I justified having it, because it was such a headache to have it in Brooklyn, was that on Wednesdays we would go on release time. That's this thing that you go to public schools. There's something called the religious hour, release time, religious hour. It's a Supreme Court case from the 30s where the public schools have to let the kids out for religious instruction.
Okay.
So on Wednesdays, there's a 770 bacher.
You would go.
I would go, yeah. Anyways, Erev Rosh Hashanah, mid-90s. I park my car on the Eastern Parkway service lane. And I'm aware of the fact that in Brooklyn, alternate side street parking, because of street sweepers, you have to move your car every other day in Brooklyn. Not in Teaneck, but in Brooklyn.
Sure.
That's suspended on Jewish holidays because there's a lot of Jews in Brooklyn. The whole 5 boroughs, it's suspended.
Yeah.
So I parked on the wrong side, but I was like, I'm okay because alternate side parking is suspended on Jewish holidays, so I'm fine. So that was like Erev Rosh Hashanah. I daven that night. Next morning, I daven. I finished davening. I don't remember what time we finished. 2 o'clock, what, or 2:30, whatever time it finishes. And I come out, and I happen to walk past the place where my car was parked. And I wasn't looking for my car, but I noticed that it was gone. My car is gone. It's the first morning of Rosh Hashanah. Now, I'm thinking to myself, what happened to my car? It could have been towed, but that's very improbable because alternate side parking is suspended. So it's Brooklyn. Maybe it was stolen. That's much more plausible. Although, I don't know, maybe it was beamed up by a UFO. Okay. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. And that's the way my mind works, by the way. It's like there's so many possibilities. Now, I thought to myself, is there anything I can do right now? Like, should I go walk to the police department and then tell them I can't make a report? Could you write it for me? Can I even tell them to write it? You know, Amir al-Nochri. And I said to myself, it's Rosh Hashanah. I'm not doing this. So I shut the idea out of my mind. The second Rosh Hashanah is finished, meaning another whole day later, and I ran to my dorm room and I get on the phone and I call the police. And I'm like, my car is gone. And I was pretty good. The 48 hours of Rosh Hashanah, or I discovered it 12 hours into it. So the 36 hours, I didn't think about it. I was able to push it out of my mind. But now I'm in panic mode. And when I say panic mode, I mean adrenaline rush and fight or flight. It's not pleasant. Okay. And I'm calling the police, you know, my car's not there. I can't find my car. Do you know where my car is? So they keep me on hold for a while. They get back on and they're like, yeah, it was towed. Oh, okay. So now at least I know that it was towed. Now I know. Okay. So I'm like, where? So they said, the Brooklyn Naval Yard. I'm like, you know, you're not supposed to tow it. Alternate street parking is
suspended.
They said, well, I don't know. Well, don't talk to us. We don't. So who do I call? And this is long before the internet. It's not easy to.
No, it's a nightmare.
No, it's a nightmare. And you're using these big fat
My car
phone
was
books.
towed once. It's an absolute nightmare.
Okay, so then I'm looking up the number.
My car was also stolen. I mean,
and stolen. Towed, stolen. Okay.
Yeah.
And beamed up by a UFO?
No.
No, not yet. As far as you know.
Yeah.
That's why. Okay. So I call up Brooklyn Naval Yard.
It's already after Rosh Hashanah now? Yeah.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
I waited until after Yom Tov was
Okay.
over. And I davened might have too. It was very frum. I davened might have. I made Havdalah probably even.
Okay.
And then ran to the phone. Okay. And I called them up. And it's like 2 minutes before 7. I remember it's 2 minutes before they close. And I'm like, do you have my car? And they told them the license plate. And they're like, yes. I'm like, great. Can I come get it? And they're like, well, we're closing in 2 minutes. And I'm like, oh, no. And they're like, so if you want your car, you have to bring your registration and you have to bring payment for $150 towing fee and $75 a day storage fee. So it's here 2 days already. So 150 plus 75, so plus 75 is $300. And I'm like, okay, and that's if I come right now. They're like, yeah, well, we're closing in 2 minutes. So you're going to come here tomorrow. So it's going to be more because you're going to get charged for the next day. It's going to be $375. I said, do you understand that today was Shoshana? It was the
Jewish holiday.
He says to me, yes, Jewish New Year. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's the Jewish New Year. That's right. Yeah. So I said, you understand that I couldn't come down there for 2 days. He's like, I know. It's the Jewish New Year. I'm like, I told you that, right? So he's like, it doesn't matter. The lot's open on the Jewish New Year, so you get charged for those days. I said, well, what would happen if my car got towed on December 31st and I picked it up on January 2nd? How many days would I pay for? Because now I'm getting, Talmud. Yeah. And he's like, oh, well, then you would only pay for 1 day because you wouldn't get charged for January 1st because it's the New Year. I said, aha, that's exactly what this is. He said, I know, it's a Jewish New Year. I'm like, so I shouldn't get charged. He's like, you're getting charged. The lot was open, you're getting charged. And he's like, and then we're closed now. He hangs up. So the next day, please remember that the day after Rosh Hashanah is the same Gedalia.
It's a fast day.
It's a fast day. Can't even have my cup of coffee. And like a good bacher, I found someone who had a car. And I said, the lot opens at 7 a.m. Get me down to the Brooklyn Navy Yard by 7 a.m. So I'll get my car and I'll get back and I'll be in time for Chassidus. Chassidus, like in the Chabad yeshivas, before the first Seder,
Sure.
even before davening, you learn Chassidus.
Yeah.
So I had this whole harebrained scheme. I'm going to go down Brooklyn Naval Yard, and it's not going to be a nightmare of a bureaucracy. I'm just going to go. Okay, I get there 7 a.m. and I had to wake up at 6 a.m. No coffee because it's a fast day. And he drops me off there, and he drives off, and I walk into the office of Brooklyn Naval Yard. I'm like the 100th guy in line. Everyone in front of me are all religious Jews. 100 religious Jews.
Around the block.
Around the block.
All from the Jewish New Year.
All from the Jewish New Year. And what are they all grumbling? I thought alternate side parking was suspended on Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Now, the truth is, it is. It is. But what are you going to do? Now, they already give you a $150 ticket, $75 a day storage fee. So it's good. It's a good business, right?
It's a great business.
Great business.
Yeah.
Who's going to fight it, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to fight it? So I waited in line. Now I realize I'm not getting back to yeshiva in time for Chassidus. After a while, I realized I'm not getting back in time for Shachris. After a few hours, I finally get up to the front, and they're like, so where's your registration? The registration? It's in the car. I don't carry it around with me. You think I have? Who cares? It's in the car. So they started fighting with me about it. So then they started looking it up. But the problem was the car was from Illinois. I told them from Chicago. So they started looking it up, and they're like, this car is not registered to you. I'm sorry. We're confiscating this vehicle. Like, what? According to the state of Illinois, your car is no longer registered, and the state of New York is confiscating it. That's it. So now my car's confiscated. And look, this is why I'm calling it first world problems. Getting a car confiscated, okay, it's not fun. It's still a first world problem, in my opinion.
Correct.
But
That's fair.
it's pretty panic-inducing, at least to me. Like, I don't take stuff like that easily. I don't take that in stride. And I'm losing it. I'm just really losing it. It's so stressful. It's a fast day. And, like, I had to go through 48 hours. I was a good boy of not knowing where my car is and just, like, not thinking about it. And then this frustration of, oh, the lot's closed in 2 minutes and you're going to get charged for every day. And I'm, like, panicked. And I'm like, the registration is not expired. No, it's my car.
Yeah.
And then we didn't even have cell phones then. So I had to get out of line and get on a payphone and call my parents in Chicago, have them call the Illinois DMV in Springfield. I'm making this story short, by the way. It's much more agonizing than the way I'm telling it.
Okay.
Finally, the lady there, she's like, it's fine. I'm like, what? She's like, oh, it's just an error. I, like, put in the number wrong. She's like, yeah, the car, yeah, it's fine. So then they get a guy with a little golf cart, and he drives me out. It's this giant, I don't know if you've ever been. Okay, it's crazy. It's wild.
Rows and rows.
Rows and rows of cars. And so she drives me out, way out. Then I get my car, and I get in the car. Oh, and I had to pay them $375 cash. And I drove off so fast because I was really, literally afraid that they're going to, like, chase after me. No, we made a mistake. We made a mistake when we said we didn't make we made a mistake when we said we made a mistake. Come back, right? But we're not over. We're not over yet because I got to get my money back. Because really, they were not supposed to tow me or ticket me because alternate side parking is suspended. So the next day, now we're talking about Daled Tishrei, okay? I go down to the Brooklyn courthouse, and I have to wait in line. Finally, I come to this judge, and this judge looks at my stuff. He looks at my address. He's like, you're Lubavitcher? I'm like, yeah. Learning in yeshiva, yeah, which, 770. He said, what Gemara are you learning? I said, Gittin. I remember very clearly. I was learning Gittin that year. He starts asking me, B'fanei Nichta, B'fanei Nechta. Like, he's a frum
Happens
guy.
to be my favorite Masechta. Just
Really?
FYI, yeah.
Okay. The judge is a frum guy, and he starts verherring me. B'fanei
Testing you
Nichta,
on the
B'fanei
details,
Nechta. Yeah. And after he asked me a few questions, I get mechutzlot, it's a whole thing. So then he's like, okay, he writes a bunch of stuff, a bunch of papers, triplicates and different, pink copies and yellow copies, carbon papers, makes a bunch of scribbles, and he hands me all these papers, and he's like, take this to the clerk. And now I'm good. I'm going to get my money back, okay? I can't get my time back. I can't get my aggravation back, but I'm going to get my money back. So I wait in line with the clerk. I get up to the clerk. The clerk takes all my papers, and I remember him grabbing it all very quickly, and I got very nervous. Again, I told you, I'm very, a nervous type. He starts shuffling the papers. I'm like, and I knew he was, being reckless with my papers. The proof of it was, at the end, he's like, so what do you want? What do you want? I want a refund. Where do you think you get a refund? I was just in with the judge. He just gave me these papers. He said, come to you. You're the clerk. You're supposed to give me a refund. He's like, that's not what it says here. I'm like, what do you mean this is not what it says? He says, it doesn't say that here. I'm like, I don't know what he wrote. I don't know what the code is that's supposed to tell you to do it.
Sounds like a modern retelling of Kafka's The Trial. I don't know if you ever read that.
It was, yeah, K.
Yeah. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
These stories, like a car.
By the way, yes,
and
it was like Kafka's The Trial.
Coming to the door,
That's
and they
right.
keep saying wrong key. I'm sorry.
The last words of Kafka's The Trial, I believe, you Google, like a dog. Is that right?
Yes. Kafka has a big role in my life, and when I hear a Kafka-esque story...
It is Kafka-esque.
Of the
and I think this is the
bureaucracy.
first non-pretentious use of
Kafka.
the adjective Kafka.
No, because this is what
it
it
is. Kafka-esque.
It's the suffering of
Yes.
everyday life.
Yes.
It's the
Yes.
suffering
First world problems on a nightmarish level of confusion and bureaucratic, draconian. Yeah,
wrong form, wrong place,
exactly.
wrong this.
Okay, you nailed it. Okay, so I'm saying to him, please, I was just in with the judge. He asked me what Gemara I'm learning.
Yeah.
The clerk's looking at Gemara. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. Right? I'm losing myself at this point. So I begged him, please, just go in there. He's in the room down the hall. He's in the room down the hall. So finally the clerk gets out from behind his plexiglass, goes down the hall. And I'm just so nervous. Here's what you got to understand. My endocrine system doesn't know the difference between a bear jumping out at me in the woods to eviscerate me and the prospect of losing $360.
To me, I don't use this word lightly. I feel like there is a suffering, an emotion.
The suffering, yes. So finally he comes back from the judge and he's like, psh, starts writing stuff. And he starts typing stuff into his little computer. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm giving you your refund. I'm like, oh, so I do get the refund. This is it. He's like, yeah. I'm like, why did you say before I didn't? He's like, 7 looked like a 4. He just mumbles, 7 looked like a 4. No, thank God this wasn't like a capital case where the 7 looked like a 4. Like somebody was put in front of a firing squad out because of bureaucratic shenanigans. But I'm not done yet.
Okay.
He gives me new papers. A new set of papers. And he says, now you take this to the cashier. I wait in line again. Finally, I get to the cashier. He's another frum guy, another identifiably religious Jew. I think he was even wearing a yarmulke. So he starts typing in all this stuff. And he sees my address again, Eastern Parkway. So he says to me, he's like, you're a Lubavitcher? I'm like, yeah. I'm like so nervous, like any question at this point, because I don't know if they're trying to trap me. Even if it's like an innocent question, I don't want to distract the guy. Because, like the 7 could look like a 4 again. Like, do your job. Don't ask me personal questions. Like, it's not a date. Okay. You're a Lubavitcher? I'm like, yeah. Can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And he's entering this. He's the last guy that you got to go to that's going to make your refund complete, which is like the end of the culmination.
Okay, he's finally at the door.
Right. He's like, I once saw a sign that the Lubavitchers put out. Poster. A picture of a leaf. And it said, when a leaf falls from a tree, the Baal Shem Tov said that is bashert. And I remember him using the word bashert. I promise you whatever poster he saw didn't say bashert because it was probably for like a popular audience, probably, divinely orchestrated. But he was from, and he said the Yiddish word bashert, which means predestined, ordained. I'm like, oh, okay, like why is he telling me this, right? This was poignant for me. This was 25 years ago. And this is not a story I say in my speeches. You know why? Because it takes too darn long to tell. I'm not going to hold an audience. No. He says to me, do you believe that? I'm like, like when you asked me an hour ago, what do you want to be known as? And I had to stop and like, oh, this guy's asking a real question. Like I could just answer him, perfunctory answer. Yeah, give me my refund. Yeah. But he's asking me. And for me, this was an intense experience. Again, first world problems all the way. Totally.
No, I appreciate that. You go through this. You finally
but my adrenaline rush doesn't know the difference.
This really happened. And this final person comes and asking you about this question from this popular poster he gets on Divine Providence.
Right.
And he looks at you, who was like a kid at the time.
25, I don't know, 24. It was before I got married.
And just looks at you innocently and says, do you believe that?
Yeah. And I stopped and I wanted to like actually give a real answer. And I started thinking about all of my experiences from the moment that I saw my car disappeared and all my reactions. And I said to him, after everything that I've been through for the past 3.5, 4 days, I would be a complete wreck right now if I didn't believe that. And he's like, oh, okay. He was satisfied. And he says, your refund will be returned, will be processed by check in 6 to 8 weeks. That was the end of the story. How absolutely mundane that story is not lost on me. And I know you were going for something juicier, but for me, that was a profound moment. Again, first world problems, but I'm dealing with a bunch of stuff that makes me not want to be here in reality, not want to be where I'm at, not want to be dealing with the people I'm dealing with, not feeling the things that my body is feeling. And I realized that the whole time what was happening is it was a struggle to embrace the theology that I had been taught. Because if you would have asked me a week before that whole story. There's a poster with a leaf, and the Baal Shem Tov said,
nod. You
and there
nod
was
right away.
Yeah,
For sure.
do you believe that? Yeah.
for
What do you
sure.
mean? Of course I believe that. That's what we were taught. But I don't know. There was something about that moment, and I'm not pretending like it was like this big crisis of faith. I don't want to dramatize it.
But it was embodied.
But when he said, do you believe it? And I had to ask myself, like, okay, there's two things here. There's my freaking out, which, if I'm to be completely honest, is a form of heresy. And there's my returning to functionality, which is not because I have such wonderful coping mechanisms. It is only because of my faith. At that moment, I was able to identify my faith as something that I use to deal with life. Not something I do to be pious. My faith is not a coping mechanism. It is my way of dealing with life. I once characterized for somebody who challenged me a lot about faith. It's escapist. And, I
was
said,
going to ask you, yeah.
the difference between fantasy and faith. What's the difference between fantasy and faith?
Yeah.
Because they're often conflated,
It
sometimes
sounds
intentionally.
Like it's the opiate of the masses.
Some
It sounds
opiate
like
of the
you're just
masses.
quoting
Right.
Marx.
Right. You said misquoting Marx. Very good. Because that's not what Marx meant
Correct.
when he said it.
Okay,
Yeah.
but tell
Okay,
me.
very good. So I said, fantasy and faith are often mistaken for each other. That's true. But they're actually opposites. And I'll tell you how they're opposite. They're not dissimilar. They're polar opposites. How so? When you know what each one is, then you understand that they are diametrically opposed. Fantasy is an idea that I cling to in order to avoid facing reality. Faith is an idea that I cling to in order to have the courage to face reality. They sound almost identical, but they're day and night.
When you were telling me this story, and it didn't amuse me that much. It moved me. And the reason why it moved me is because I have long been a victim in my own eyes of the trauma of everyday life.
Trauma of everyday
The
life?
Trauma of Everyday Life. It's a book by Mark Epstein, a psychologist.
Really?
It's a play off of Jung or Freud, the psychopathology of everyday life, but the trauma of everyday life.
That's a great title.
How pedestrian and how small your life can sometimes feel, and how you sometimes feel almost as if the smallness that is grabbing your focus is distracting you from what your life should be.
Right.
And I make this mistake even though I wish I never did, like with family issues. It comes up, your kid wants your attention, somebody wants your attention.
It's a distraction.
You're
so petty.
distracting. Yeah, I don't want my life to be here in this swamp. And you pause, he says, this is the life.
Right.
This is what it is. This is the main event. And when you were talking about it, to come back to your language, this bureaucracy, this notion of this Kafka-esque world of just that everyday life
The drudgery,
trauma,
the banality.
the drudgery, the banality, all of that, to me, is the confusion of the sensitivity of innocence with the sensitivity of experience. Because it means if you were to have walked by that poster, that had some pithy phrase,
Right.
and you would have looked at the poster and said 100%.
Yeah, sure.
That's a sensitivity of innocence,
Right.
still. Because
Sure.
you don't know what it means to be without that. You don't know what it means to lose that. You
Right.
don't know what it means to
Right.
be estranged and alienated from.
Right.
But when you're going through paperwork, you're in a Brooklyn Naval Yard, your life feels unmoored, untethered, that now is where...
It's a loss of control.
And it's that loss that allows that teshuva
But
and
you
the
don't
sensitivity
mourn the loss of
experience.
control. You mourn the loss of the belief that life is in order.
You mourn the loss
Of the innocent belief that life is in order. Why? Because nothing was disturbing before. So then you had the innocent belief that life is in order.
I have my own moments that I think I've shared before, a lot relating to the world of dating. There was a point where, dating wasn't going well, and I used to go into a room and say Tehillim, Psalms. I would pray before I even spoke to the shadchan to find out what a certain girl was up to, free, this, yes. And it just kept on not working out. And I was clinging on to, I think, that sensitivity of innocence where, like, this gumball machine mentality where, like, if I keep on going through that, and I wasn't able to have that more transformative sensitivity of experience. The quote that I pulled up, because the imagery from the trial and getting confused of what the right door, so to speak, of Teshuva is, reminded me of this essay that I am deeply fond of that was originally published in Harper's. It's an essay called Laughing with Kafka that was written by David Foster Wallace. It's based on a speech that he gave about teaching Kafka.
Okay.
And he's saying why he thinks people have such a hard time getting Kafka. And exactly as you started with that story, you began the story saying, I don't know if you're going to be moved by it, amused by it. I don't know if you're going to get it. And I saw your eyes looking at me during it. You're like, I don't know if it's landing.
Right.
It made
But then once you said, this reminds me of the trial, I knew you got it.
But it reminded me, because it reminded me exactly of this essay, and I want to read it to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And it is this, I think, that makes Kafka's wit inaccessible to children whom our culture has trained to see jokes as entertainment and entertainment as reassurance. It's not that students don't get Kafka's humor, but that we've taught them to see humor as something you get, the same way we've taught them that a self is something you just have. No wonder they cannot appreciate the really central Kafka joke, that the horrible struggle to establish a human self results in a self whose humanity is inseparable from that horrific struggle. That our endless and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. That's one of my favorite sentences. That our endless and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. Sensitivity of experience. You know, we want that blank slate. We want that clean. And instead, you know, it's that paperwork and that moment where, do you believe this? In the supermarket, in the drudgery, in the banality, can you discover that sensitivity of experience?
That's great. Wow.
This has been an absolute pleasure. There's so much more to talk about, and I am absolutely 100% committed that we're going to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always close my interviews with more rapid-fire questions. Could we do some rapid-fire questions?
Okay, I'm not a rapid guy, but let's try.
Okay, so no car getting towed stories for any of the rapid-fire.
No.
My first question I always ask my guests is I'm always looking for book recommendations that helped you reimagine the subject of tshuva. We obviously spoke about Tanya. We mentioned your own book, A God of Our Understanding. What are the books that shaped your, preferably in English, that are accessible to our listeners?
So it's a little bit scholarly.
Please.
No, I don't mean like academic scholarly. I mean like yeshiva scholarly. But the Balatanya's grandson, the Tamach Tzedek.
Okay.
There's a mimer, a discourse called Vidu Tshuva, and it's in a sefer called Derech Mitzvei Secha. And many of the discourses from that book have been translated and annotated in English, and that is one of them.
Where's that English translation? Do you know what it's called?
I think it's called like excerpts from Derech Mitzvei Secha.
Okay.
And it's got maybe like 10, 15 of the greatest hits. It's a discourse about what is tshuva. That, to me, like, if you told me to prepare a class on tshuva, I would just teach that.
If somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to take a sabbatical for as long as you needed to go back to school and get a PhD, what do you think the subject and title of your dissertation would be about?
Wow. I think I'd write something like Reb Tzadok HaKohen and Reb Nachman and different tshuva.
What's going on now? I can't even tell if you're kibitzing with me. That was my master's thesis.
Well, this is my doctor's thesis.
Are you kibitzing with me, or
you asked? No, you asked a question.
I thought
if
you were
I could
saying
get a PhD, what would I write for my
comparing Reb Tzadok and Rabbi Nachman on Teshuva?
Yeah, that's what I would write.
That was at the heart of my master's thesis.
Okay, well,
it would be
you got a master's in my fantasy.
It would be
I get
so
a PhD.
passive aggressive of you.
Yeah.
I give you all this money and you just displace my own scholarship. That
would be the only way to use that money.
And I just want to note this so I don't forget it. You know, whenever we introduce 1840, we always talk about balancing modern sensibilities with traditional sensitivities. And to me, what I think I'm getting at is...
I'm all about that.
The sensibility is the teshuva of the innocence of experience, and traditional sensitivities is that hovering, that loss, that out of grasp for many, and hoping to integrate the two.
Traditional sensitivities is like factory default setting.
Exactly.
Right? And then
modern sensibilities is like you're in the world.
And you know exactly what you stand to lose, and maybe even you've lost it.
Correct.
Or you're losing it, and you're constantly grasping at it to hold on to.
And that's what we're doing here at 1840, which is why I really appreciated that. And I appreciate you. I'm so excited that we're able to do this. My last question, I'm always curious because I have such bad sleeping habits myself. I'm always interested in my guests' sleeping habits. What time do you go to sleep at night, and what time do you wake up in the morning?
Well, waking up depends on Seifman Krishma, so that varies. You know, the last time to
you go right up to the line.
Well, I calculate backward how long.
You go backwards, okay.
Yeah, because I say Krishma like a mensch.
Okay.
I don't put on like a second pair of tefillin for. There are people who have, by the way, not only they have Rashi and Rebbe Taub, but they have their Krishma tefillin and then their Shacharis tefillin.
No,
it is
that's
a thing.
Real thing.
I promise you, it's a real thing. I'm not on that level, but no, like because of Shachar and whatever.
Well, we need a number though. What time do you go to sleep at night? What time do you wake up in the morning?
3 or 4.
You go to sleep at 3 or 4.
Look, ideally, I have a bedtime reminder set on my phone for 11.
It's almost
I muted
11
it.
now.
Yeah, I know.
I'm similar to you. I'm a late to bed, late to rise. I'm not an early riser.
But, Seisman Krishma is a thing, so, usually count back like 20, 30 minutes from there.
Rabbi Shais Taub, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
There's something I found so incredibly moving and real about this notion of two types of teshuva, the teshuva of innocence and the teshuva of experience. And I see this in so many places in my own life, the mistake that you are knocking and trying to get your way back into the teshuva of innocence, the promises that you make that I'm going to be better now, it's going to be perfect from now on, not realizing that it is a different door to teshuva that is now open to you. It was after my conversation with Shais Taub that he sent me, based on our conversation, the quote, in that long sprawling story about his car. He sent me the quote from Kafka itself, because I think in all of our lives we have felt that Kafka-esque feeling of being locked out, of knocking on that door, of we want that entry, we want that acceptance, and feeling alienated, feeling that for some bureaucratic, out of our hands reasons we are not being welcomed into that space. In the words of Kafka, and I believe this comes from his story The Trial, Kafka writes, "Before the law stands a doorkeeper on guard. To this doorkeeper, there comes a man from the country who begs for admittance to the law. But the doorkeeper says that he cannot admit the man at the moment. The man on reflection asks if he will be allowed then to enter later. It's possible, answered the doorkeeper, but not at this moment." And the entire story is about continuing to bang on this door and being asked to let in. I don't know if I'm going to get him in trouble for saying that he sent this to me, but he actually sent me a clip from a Martin Scorsese movie that I'm embarrassed to admit I have not yet seen, although I fancy myself a little bit of a cinephile. In both senses of the word, I wrote a book on sin, but a cinephile with the letter C, a cinephile meaning a lover of movies. But there is a scene in the movie After Hours, which was directed by Martin Scorsese, which is very clearly taken from Kafka's The Trial.
Why don't you just let me in?
You really want to go inside?
Yes, it's very important. I've got people in there. They're expecting me. Why don't you just let me in?
You're sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
And I think so often in our process of teshuva is this sense of just let me in. I want to be good. I want to be innocent again. I don't want to make this mistake. I know for myself and my struggles, particularly in my 20s, I would make these promises, shavuas, nadarim, really like oaths. I don't want to ever mess up again. And then it happens again and again and again. And you feel like you are locked out from your own innocence and your life begins to careen into a different direction. And you begin to wonder, will I ever reclaim the innocence of my youth? Will I ever have that freshness, that perfection that I once associated with life itself? It's an idea that Rav Kook, in fact, talks about in Oros HaKodesh in the 2nd chapter. This is from the translation of Sarah Schneider, who I really hope to have one day on the podcast. She's an incredible Kabbalist, an incredible mystic, and she has books that I would recommend to read, one of the best introductions to mystical thinking. But her book is called, from where I'm taking this from Kabbalistic Writings on the Nature of Masculine and Feminine. And in her book, she quotes from Rav Kook. I'm going to quote it in Hebrew and then I can translate. Ma anu choshvim al davar hamatara halokis b'hamtzos ha'avaya. When contemplating the timeless question, why did God create the universe? One observes that there are kind of two tendencies within religious life. Omrim anu, we say, shehashlemos hamuchletes hi mechuyeves hametzias, that absolute perfection requires the complete actualization of all potential. Unrealized possibility is always less than perfect. Yet Rav Kook says, and this is so amazing, Aval yesh shleimus shel hosafa shleimus. There is a type of perfection which is actually the process of moving towards, of adding perfection. And it's in that second gate, which I think is this gate of experience. It's the tshuva of experience, not the tshuva of innocence, where it's the process of moving towards something, even with the knowledge that you can't be perfect. That is an act of tshuva itself. It is the acknowledgement that the act of tshuva is not perfection. It's not a clean slate. It's not being perfect forever. The act of tshuva is the process of moving towards something, of being able to confront and grapple with that Kafka-esque feeling of being locked out and finding another door, and realizing that the very process is the act of tshuva, not the attainment of perfection itself. You know, it's so interesting, and we've mentioned this before, Gershom Scholem, the great mystic, felt that the greatest entry into Kabbalah was through the writings of Kafka, Franz Kafka. And that's always resonated to me because I think more than anybody else, the pain of existence, the pain of striving, the pain of aspirations is something that Kafka really highlights and imagines. And it's in our conversation that we just had with Rabbi Taub, with Shais Taub. When I heard that story, I said, "You're retelling the trial as we speak." And he agreed. So often in our lives, the greatest pain is that mundane frustration of banging on the door, wanting for things to go smoothly and not accepting the reality of what life really is. And it's that quote that always stays with me from that fantastic essay from David Foster Wallace, Laughing with Kafka, where he talks about his struggle of teaching Kafka. And it's there that he writes, and this is what I quoted, that our endless and impossible journey towards home is in fact our home. That it's not about getting let in to the door and banging hard enough that you'll reclaim your innocence. It's that endless and impossible journey, finding another way, finding another path through experience where tshuva really emerges. And for me, this is the tshuva that I learned to embrace in my own life. A tshuva that realizes that that clean slate that your teacher, Rebbe, rabbi, always hangs over you, that you're looking for that clean slate. Maybe that clean slate is never actually attained. Maybe a part of tshuva is dealing with the enduring messiness, having the strength to continue within that messiness. And that clean slate that we're promised and we hope for, that maybe we have and feel for 10 seconds after davening on Yomim Noraim, on the high holidays. But that's not really what we're after. We're not after the clean slate. We're not after the innocence. We're after the strength and the courage to move even within the mess. And it's that idea that I actually cite at the very end of one of the early chapters in my book, an idea that I heard from my dearest. People always criticize me. I use the word dearest too often, but my dearest friend, Rabbi Dr. Simcha Willig, that he heard from Rabbi Rob Scheinberg, an incredible reading of what we say when we daven and we say, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'Nashuva, God, return yourself to us. Chadesh Yameinu Kikedem. Renew our days of old. And it's a very strange plea, renew our days of old. Either they're new or they're old. And the way that the Medrash explains it is that Chadesh Yameinu Kikedem, this renewal that we're after, Kedem means, like Kedem is the description that we use for the Garden of Eden. But there's something very unusual in the way the Medrash frames Kedem, meaning the Garden of Eden. And this is what Rabbi Rob Scheinberg explains, that the word kedem in Genesis 3:24, if you could look it up, that the Medrash uses to explain this prayer, is not a word associated with the Garden of Eden itself, but a word associated with exile from the garden. Meaning it's the language that the Torah uses after Adam and Chava get banished from Gan Eden. The decision to quote the word kedem from this verse rather than its first appearance in chapter 2, verse 8, indicates that from the perspective of this quotation from Eicha Rabbah, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem does not mean renew our lives as they were in the Garden of Eden. Rather, it means renew our lives as you renewed our lives after we were exiled from the Garden of Eden. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem is then not a plea for restoration of a formerly perfect condition, but rather is a plea for resilience, a plea for the ability to renew ourselves after future crises and dislocations, just as our lives have been renewed before. As Elie Wiesel said, God gave Adam a secret, and that secret was not how to begin, but how to begin again. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem is not a plea for the Teshuva of Innocence, of that clean slate of everything being perfect. But Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem is a plea for that Kedem, that Garden of Eden, after we're banished, after we're banging on the door and not being let in. A plea for the strength, courage, and resilience to continue onward even through the messiness, through that endless and impossible journey toward home that is in fact our home. The Teshuva of experience. So thank you so much for listening. This entire series on Teshuva is sponsored by our dearest friends, Daniel and Mira Stokar. We are so appreciative of their generosity. This episode, like so many of our episodes, was edited by our friend, Dina Emerson. It wouldn't be a Jewish podcast without a little bit of Jewish guilt, and I have to remind myself to say this during our series on Teshuva. How could we not? So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, tell your friends about it. You could also donate at 1840.org/donate. It really helps us reach new listeners and continue putting out great content. You can also leave us a voicemail with feedback or questions that we may play on a future episode. That number is 917-720-5629. Once again, that number is 917-720-5629. If you'd like to learn more about this topic or some of the other great ones we've covered in the past, be sure to check out 1840.org. That's the number 18 followed by the word 40, FORTY.org. You can also find videos, articles, recommended readings, and weekly emails. Thank you so much for listening, and stay curious, my friends.